There are moments in archaeology when the evidence stops behaving like history and begins to feel like a glitch, a perfectly aligned structure where no tools should have allowed it. A pattern carved into stone that repeats across continents with no known connection. A settlement frozen in time, not destroyed, not abandoned in panic, just left. These anomalies do not shout, they whisper, quietly resisting explanation. Each excavation adds data. Yet sometimes the deeper we dig, the less coherent the story becomes. It is as if fragments of an older logic, one we no longer understand, are still embedded in the earth. And the most unsettling possibility is not that we are missing answers, but that we are asking the wrong questions. Hidden behind the grand ceremonial corridors of Temple of Seti, the first lies a structure that seems to defy everything we expect from ancient Egyptian architecture. Known today as the Osirian, this subterranean complex appears less like a temple and more like a relic from another time, massive, austere, and strangely out of place. Unlike the finely carved reliefs and decorated walls of nearby sanctuaries, the Osirian is built from enormous granite blocks stripped of ornamentation and partially submerged in water. It feels older, heavier, and more primordial, as if it belongs not to the flourishing New Kingdom, but to a far more distant and shadowy past. From the moment it was uncovered, it has challenged archaeologists, historians, and engineers alike, raising a single persistent question: what was its true purpose? The Osirian is located in Abydos, one of the most sacred sites in ancient Egypt, long associated with burial pilgrimage and the cult of the god Osiris. Abydos was believed to be the symbolic burial place of Osiris himself, making it a focal point for rituals connected to death and rebirth. Yet the Osirian was not always visible. For centuries, it lay buried beneath layers of sand and debris, its existence largely forgotten. It was only in the early 20th century, during systematic excavations led by Flinders Petrie and later Margaret Alice Murray, that the structure was revealed. As the sand was cleared away, what emerged was not simply another chamber or annex, but a massive underground complex cut deep into the earth and constructed with an engineering approach radically different from anything surrounding it. Its rediscovery immediately raised doubts about its origin, its age, and its function within the broader religious landscape of Abydos. At the heart of the Osirian lies a rectangular island of stone, surrounded by a deep channel of water. Rising from this island are colossal granite pillars, each carved from single blocks weighing tens of tons. The precision with which these stones are cut and fitted is remarkable, especially considering their size and the confined subterranean environment in which they were placed. The entire structure is aligned with a strict geometric order, creating a sense of balance and intentionality that goes beyond mere construction. Yet the most striking feature is the presence of water itself. Even today, groundwater seeps into the chamber, filling the surrounding trench and reflecting the massive pillars above. This was likely not an accident. In ancient Egyptian cosmology, water represented the primordial chaos known as Nun, the infinite expanse from which creation first emerged. By placing a stone island within a body of water, the builders may have been recreating the very moment of cosmic birth, a symbolic landscape where death and rebirth could be ritually enacted. The Osirian stands in stark contrast to the ornate and highly symbolic temples of the New Kingdom. While structures like Karnak or Luxor are covered in inscriptions, reliefs, and vibrant iconography, the Osirian is almost entirely devoid of decoration. Its surfaces are plain, its forms monumental and its aesthetic minimal. This has led many scholars to question whether it truly belongs to the same period as the Temple of Seti I. Some have proposed that it may have been constructed as a deliberate archaic imitation designed to evoke a more ancient and sacred style. Others have gone further, suggesting that it may predate the temple, entirely representing a surviving fragment of an earlier architectural tradition that was later incorporated into the site. The use of massive granite blocks also invites comparison with other megalithic structures around the world, such as the stone platforms of Puma Punku or the colossal trilithons of Baalbek. In each case, we see a similar emphasis on scale precision and durability qualities that continue to puzzle modern engineers. Archaeological investigations have revealed that the Osirion was carefully integrated into the broader religious complex of Abydos, yet its exact role remains uncertain. Some inscriptions found in nearby areas suggest a connection to Osiris and to funerary rituals associated with the pharaoh. However, the structure itself offers few direct clues. There are no clear burial chambers, no obvious altars, and no definitive evidence of regular ceremonial use. Its layout does not easily accommodate large gatherings, nor does it resemble a conventional tomb. This ambiguity has fueled a wide range of interpretations. Was it a symbolic tomb for Osiris, a place where the god's death and resurrection were ritually reenacted? Was it a hidden chamber reserved for elite initiation rites, accessible only to a select few? Or was it something even more abstract, a physical representation of cosmological principles encoded in stone and water? Today, the Osirion remains one of the most enigmatic structures in Egypt. Mainstream Egyptology generally attributes its construction to the reign of Seti I, interpreting it as a symbolic tomb or cenotaph dedicated to Osiris. Yet the questions persist. Why employ such massive stones in a hidden subterranean space? Why design a structure that deliberately floods rather than one that remains dry and accessible? And why adopt an architectural style so radically different from its surroundings? Some researchers argue that these choices were intentional, meant to evoke the timeless, unchanging nature of the afterlife. Others see in the Osirion echoes of lost knowledge, a fragment of a building tradition that has largely disappeared from the historical record. What is certain is that the Osirion was never meant to be ordinary. It was conceived as a place where the boundaries between life and death, order and chaos, earth and water could be explored and perhaps even transcended. And in that sense, its true purpose may not lie in what it was used for, but in what it represents: a silent, submerged monument to humanity's enduring attempt to understand the mysteries of existence. Beneath the quiet surface of Royston, hidden below layers of ordinary streets and centuries of daily life, lies a structure that feels entirely out of place in both time and purpose. Royston Cave is not a grand ruin, not a sprawling complex, and not even visible to the casual observer. Yet within its confined underground chamber exists a concentration of symbolism, craftsmanship, and unanswered questions that rival far larger archaeological sites. At first glance, the cave appears almost modest, a bell-shaped hollow, carved into chalk, descending quietly into darkness. But as the eye adjusts to the dim light, the walls reveal themselves covered in a dense tapestry of carvings that seem less like decoration and more like fragments of a forgotten narrative. These figures do not align into a clear story. Instead, they overlap, contradict, and obscure one another as if multiple voices across time have tried to speak within the same confined space. It is this tension between deliberate construction and incomprehensible meaning that transforms Royston Cave from a curiosity into a true enigma. The cave's location is far from arbitrary. It lies directly beneath a historic junction where two major ancient routes intersect Icknield Way, one of Britain's oldest known trackways, and Ermine Street, a key artery of the Roman Empire in Britain. These routes carried not only goods and travelers, but also ideas, beliefs, and cultural exchanges over vast stretches of time. This intersection would have been a place of convergence, of movement, of transition, and perhaps of significance beyond the purely practical. Many ancient cultures assigned symbolic importance to crossroads, viewing them as liminal spaces where worlds intersect, the known and the unknown, the physical and the spiritual. That Royston Cave sits precisely beneath such a junction invites speculation that its purpose may have been tied to this deeper symbolic geography. In 1742, during routine construction work, laborers uncovered a narrow vertical shaft descending into the earth. As they cleared debris and widened the opening, they found themselves peering into a sealed chamber below, untouched, silent, and seemingly forgotten. There was no doorway, no corridor leading in, no architectural hint that such a space existed beneath the town. This mode of discovery immediately set Royston Cave apart. Unlike most human-made structures, which are designed with access in mind, this chamber appeared to resist entry. The vertical shaft suggested that access was either highly controlled or never intended for frequent use. It raised a fundamental question that still lingers: was the cave deliberately hidden, or was its original entrance lost to time? The absence of a clear entry point is not a minor detail. It is central to the mystery. It implies intention, secrecy, or transformation, each possibility pointing toward a very different interpretation of the cave's purpose. The interior walls of the cave are covered with carvings that defy easy classification. Among them are recognizable Christian figures: Saint Catherine with her wheel, Saint Christopher bearing the Christ child, and scenes that resemble the crucifixion. These images suggest a strong religious dimension, possibly linking the cave to medieval devotional practices. Yet the clarity of this interpretation quickly dissolves upon closer inspection. Many carvings are crudely executed, disproportionate, or stylistically inconsistent with established medieval art. Some appear almost primitive, while others show a surprising level of detail. The images overlap in ways that obscure rather than clarify, creating a visual density that feels more like accumulation than design. This inconsistency suggests that the cave may have been used repeatedly over time, each visitor or group adding their own marks without regard for a unified composition. Alternatively, it may indicate that the cave served multiple functions, its meaning evolving across generations. The carvings become less a message and more a record, a layered archive of human presence, belief, and perhaps confusion. From an engineering perspective, the cave is deceptively sophisticated. Its bell-shaped form is symmetrical and deliberate, carved into chalk with a level of control that suggests planning rather than improvisation. The smooth curvature of the chamber walls and the balanced proportions indicate that its creators understood both the material and the structural stability required for such a space. When compared to other subterranean structures in Europe, such as hermit caves, crypts, or hidden chapels, Royston Cave shares certain characteristics but never fully aligns with any category. Most similar sites have clear entrances defined purposes, and more coherent decorative programs. Royston Cave, by contrast, remains ambiguous on all counts. One of the most persistent theories links the site to the Knights Templar, a medieval order often associated with secrecy symbolism and hidden spaces. Some carvings have been interpreted as bearing Templar influence, and the cave's location along significant travel routes adds to the plausibility of this connection. However, no direct evidence, no artifacts, inscriptions, or historical records confirms their involvement. The theory remains attractive, but ultimately unproven. Other comparisons suggest the cave could have functioned as a private devotional chamber, a place of retreat, or even a symbolic space tied to rituals now lost to history. Yet none of these explanations fully account for the cave's unique combination of features. In the end, Royston Cave remains unresolved not because of a lack of study, but because of an overabundance of possibilities. Every aspect of the cave invites interpretation, yet none provide closure. Its location suggests importance, its construction implies intention, and its carvings hint at meaning. But these elements never converge into a single, coherent explanation. It is this fragmentation that defines the cave's enduring power. Unlike monumental ruins whose purpose can be inferred from scale and context, Royston Cave operates on a more intimate and elusive level. It does not declare its function, it withholds it. Perhaps it was a sacred space, hidden deliberately from the world above. Perhaps it evolved over time, accumulating layers of meaning until its original purpose was lost. Or perhaps it represents something entirely outside the frameworks we use to understand the past, a localized tradition, a symbolic act, or a forgotten practice that left no trace beyond this single chamber. Standing within its walls today, one is confronted not with answers, but with absence, with the realization that history does not always preserve its own explanations. And so the cave endures, not as a solved puzzle, but as a question carved into stone, waiting silently beneath the surface. Hidden within a quiet sandstone outcrop in Carryong, just north of the modern city of Gosford, lies a site that has sparked decades of controversy, fascination, and outright disbelief. Known as the Gosford Glyphs, this cluster of over 300 carved symbols appears at first glance unmistakably similar to the sacred writing system of ancient Egypt. Yet their presence in Australia, geographically and historically disconnected from Egypt, creates a paradox that continues to challenge both mainstream archaeology and alternative historical theories. The carvings are etched into two parallel sandstone walls, forming a narrow passage almost like a corridor deliberately chosen to frame the inscriptions. The location itself is not monumental, not marked by towering structures or ceremonial architecture. Instead, its isolation adds to the mystery. Why would such intricate carvings be placed here, far from any known ancient settlement or trade route? The surrounding landscape offers no immediate answers, only dense bushland, weathered rock, and silence. The first recorded attention to the glyphs dates back to the early 20th century, although it is widely believed that the carvings may have been known locally before that time. However, no formal documentation exists from earlier periods, which immediately raises one of the central questions. If these glyphs are truly ancient, why is there no historical record of their existence prior to modern times? Unlike major archaeological discoveries that emerge through systematic excavation, the Gosford glyphs appear almost abruptly in the historical timeline, as if they had been waiting or placed to be discovered. What makes the site truly extraordinary is not just the presence of carvings, but their apparent complexity. The symbols include figures resembling Egyptian deities, human forms in profile animals, and a variety of hieroglyphic-like signs. Some interpretations, largely from independent researchers rather than professional Egyptologists, suggest that the glyphs tell a coherent narrative. According to these translations, the inscriptions describe an expedition led by a royal Egyptian figure, sometimes identified as a son of Pharaoh Khufu, who supposedly traveled across vast oceans only to meet a tragic end in a foreign land. The story speaks of shipwreck, illness, and burial, implying that the site itself may mark a distant and forgotten grave. If such a narrative were authentic, it would fundamentally alter our understanding of ancient seafaring. It would suggest that Egyptians possess not only the capability for transoceanic voyages, but also the intent to explore lands far beyond the known boundaries of their civilization. However, this interpretation faces immediate scrutiny. Professional Egyptologists have pointed out that the glyphs contain inconsistencies. Symbols from different dynastic periods appear side by side. Grammatical structures are often incorrect, and some signs are either misused or entirely fabricated. In a writing system as structured and sacred as Egyptian hieroglyphs, such irregularities are difficult to reconcile with authentic ancient authorship. Beyond the linguistic anomalies, the physical characteristics of the carvings also raise questions. Many of the incisions appear sharp and relatively unweathered, suggesting a more recent origin. In true ancient inscriptions, especially those exposed to the elements for thousands of years, one would expect significant erosion, smoothing of edges, and patina development. While some portions of the Gosford glyphs do show signs of weathering, others look strikingly fresh, as if carved with modern tools. This inconsistency fuels the argument that the site may have been altered or entirely created in the recent past. Archaeological investigations in the area have been limited and inconclusive. Unlike recognized heritage sites, the Gosford glyphs have not undergone extensive, peer-reviewed excavation. No associated artifacts, such as pottery tools or organic remains, have been found to support the presence of an ancient Egyptian expedition. The absence of contextual evidence is critical. In archaeology, isolated inscriptions without supporting material culture are rarely accepted as proof of historical events. Context is everything, and here, context is almost entirely missing. When compared to authentic Egyptian sites, the differences become even more pronounced. In Egypt, hieroglyphs are typically integrated into architectural or funerary contexts. Temples, tombs, monuments, each carefully aligned with religious and cultural practices. The Gosford glyphs, by contrast, exist in isolation, without any accompanying structure or clear ritual significance. Even when considering other examples of ancient contact theories, there is usually at least some supporting evidence, whether in the form of shared artifacts, genetic links, or consistent iconography. In this case, the glyphs stand alone. One reason is the sheer effort required to produce the carvings. Over 300 symbols, many of them detailed and varied, would take considerable time and knowledge to create. If this is a hoax, it is not a casual one. It suggests either a highly dedicated individual or group with a deep interest in Egyptian symbolism, or a series of contributors over time, each adding to the site and complicating its narrative. Another possibility is that the site represents a layered history, a mixture of original markings and later additions. It is conceivable that an initial set of carvings, perhaps created in a different cultural or historical context, was later modified by individuals attempting to impose an Egyptian interpretation. This would explain both the inconsistencies in style and the varying degrees of weathering. However, without definitive dating techniques applied directly to the carvings, such theories remain speculative. Ultimately, the Gosford glyphs occupy a unique position in the study of ancient mysteries. They are neither fully accepted nor completely dismissed. Instead, they exist in a gray zone where evidence interpretation and imagination intersect. For some, they represent a tantalizing hint of lost knowledge and forgotten journeys. For others, they are a cautionary example of how easily narratives can be constructed and believed without rigorous proof. What makes the site enduringly compelling is not just the question of authenticity, but the broader implications it carries. If the glyphs are genuine, they point to a chapter of human history that has yet to be written. If they are a fabrication, they reveal something equally fascinating about modern fascination with the ancient world, the desire to connect, to rediscover, and perhaps to rewrite the boundaries of what we think is possible. And so the carvings remain silent and unmoving, etched into the sandstone walls of Caerleon. They offer no definitive answers, only an invitation to look closer, to question deeper, and to consider a possibility that lingers just beyond certainty. Across the scattered islands of the Western Pacific, where coral reefs break the force of the ocean and navigation once depended on memory rather than maps, there exists one of the most extraordinary economic systems ever created. On the island of Yap, enormous stone discs, some towering over a human, once functioned as currency. These are the Rye stones, carved from limestone, shaped into circular forms, with a hole at the center, and placed along village paths as silent witnesses to centuries of exchange. At first glance, they seem impractical, even absurd. How could something so massive, so immovable, serve as money? Yet for generations, this system not only worked, it thrived. And the deeper one looks, the more it challenges modern assumptions about value, ownership, and the very nature of wealth itself. Yap lies within the Federated States of Micronesia, a remote archipelago surrounded by vast stretches of open ocean. The island itself is rich in tradition, but poor in one crucial resource: it has no natural limestone deposits. This fact lies at the heart of the mystery. Every Rye stone found on Yap originated from distant islands, most notably Palau, located hundreds of kilometers away across unpredictable seas. The implication is staggering. Long before the arrival of modern ships or metal tools, Yapi's navigators and craftsmen were undertaking dangerous voyages to quarry shape and transport multi-ton stones across the ocean. These were not small artifacts that could be carried in canoes. Some Rye stones weigh several tons. The question is not simply how they were made, but how such a feat was even attempted and repeated over generations. Unlike many ancient artifacts, the Rye stones were never truly lost to history. They were always present, embedded within the living culture of Yap. Early European explorers in the 19th century documented them with fascination, describing entire landscapes dotted with massive stone discs. Yet what surprised outsiders most was not their size, but their use. These stones did not circulate in markets. They were not exchanged hand to hand. Instead, ownership existed as a shared understanding within the community. A Rye stone could remain in the same place for decades, even centuries, while its ownership changed multiple times. The system relied entirely on collective memory. Every villager knew which stone belonged to whom and why. In some cases, even stones that had been lost at sea continued to exist as valid forms of currency because the community agreed that they did. The process of creating a rice stone began far from Yap, in the limestone quarries of Palau. Using primitive tools, likely stone or shell implements, workers carved out large circular slabs, smoothing their surfaces and cutting a central hole for transport. This hole allowed poles to be inserted, enabling groups to carry the stone or secure it during transport. But the true challenge lay in the journey home. The Pacific Ocean is not forgiving. Sudden storms, strong currents, and vast distances made every voyage a gamble with death. Oral histories recount expeditions where lives were lost, rafts capsized, and stones sank into the depths. Paradoxically, these tragedies increased the value of the stones. A rice stone associated with a perilous journey or a fatal accident was considered more valuable as its story carried greater weight. In this way, risk itself became a form of economic capital. What makes the rice stones truly unique is that their value was never intrinsic. Unlike gold or silver, they had no utility beyond their symbolic role. Their worth was entirely derived from narrative who discovered the stone, how difficult it was to transport, what events occurred along the way. In essence, each rice stone functioned as a physical record of history. The larger and more dramatic the story, the greater the value. This transforms the rice system into something remarkably abstract. Ownership was not about possession, but recognition. Transfer did not require movement, only agreement. In one striking account, a rice stone that sank during transport was still considered part of the economy. Though physically unreachable, its existence was acknowledged, and its ownership could be transferred like any other. It is a concept that feels startlingly modern, echoing ideas of intangible assets and decentralized trust. When compared to other ancient economic systems such as metal coinage in Lydia or shell-based currencies in parts of Africa and Asia, the rice stones stand apart. Most early currencies evolved toward portability and standardization. Yap moved in the opposite direction, embracing scale immobility and narrative complexity. This raises profound questions. Why did such a system emerge here and not elsewhere? Was it shaped by the island's isolation, forcing a reliance on trust over physical exchange? Or does it reflect a deeper human instinct that value is not inherent in objects, but constructed through shared belief? Archaeological studies have confirmed quarry sites in Palau and traced trade routes across the region, but many details remain unresolved. How were the largest stones transported without advanced technology? How did such a decentralized system avoid disputes or collapse? And perhaps most intriguingly, could similar systems have existed elsewhere, lost to time because they left behind no physical transactions to record them? The Yap rice stones are more than an archaeological curiosity. They represent a radically different way of understanding value, one that prioritizes story over substance, memory over material, and community consensus over physical control. In a world increasingly defined by digital currencies and abstract financial systems, the lessons of Yap feel unexpectedly relevant. Thousands of years ago, on a remote Pacific island, people created a form of wealth that existed not in the object itself, but in the shared agreement that gave it meaning. Across the natural world, stone is rarely obedient to symmetry. Mountains fracture unpredictably, cliffs erode unevenly, and even the most structured geological formations tend to reveal irregularity upon closer inspection. Yet hidden in the landscape of Pennsylvania lies a rock that appears to defy this expectation entirely. Known as the Waffle Rock, this formation presents a surface covered in a grid of square depressions so uniform, so deliberate in appearance, that it seems less like the product of geological time and more like the remnant of an ancient design. At first glance, it evokes something unmistakably artificial, like a carved slab, a patterned platform, or even a fragment of a forgotten construction. And it is precisely this unsettling clarity of form that transforms an ordinary stone into a subject of enduring mystery. The Waffle Rock is located in the state of Pennsylvania, in the United States, embedded within a region characterized by sedimentary rock formations, particularly sandstone deposits formed hundreds of millions of years ago. This geological context is important, as sandstone is known to fracture and erode in response to environmental pressures such as temperature shifts, water infiltration, and chemical weathering. The surrounding terrain offers no immediate signs of ancient civilizations, monumental construction, or archaeological complexity. It is a landscape shaped primarily by natural forces, not human hands. And yet within this otherwise ordinary setting, the Waffle Rock emerges as an anomaly, its patterned surface sharply contrasting with the randomness of the environment around it, as if it belongs to a different narrative entirely. The rock was not discovered in the traditional archaeological sense, but rather noticed and gradually recognized for its unusual characteristics. Visitors and observers were drawn to its surface, where a repeating grid of square or near-square indentations creates a texture unlike typical erosion patterns. Each depression is bordered by raised ridges, forming a network of intersecting lines that divide the rock into a series of geometric compartments. What makes this particularly striking is not just the presence of these shapes, but their consistency. The spacing between lines, the relative uniformity of depth, and the way the pattern extends across the surface all contribute to an impression of intentional design. It is the kind of visual order that the human brain instinctively associates with construction measurement and planning. From a geological perspective, the most widely accepted explanation attributes the pattern to natural fracturing followed by differential erosion. According to this view, the rock developed a network of cracks due to internal stresses, possibly related to temperature fluctuations or tectonic forces, and over time, weathering processes widened these cracks into the grooves visible today. However, this explanation encounters a fundamental challenge. Natural fracture systems tend to produce irregular, chaotic patterns, often forming polygons of varying sizes, rather than a consistent grid. In contrast, the Waffle Rock displays a level of regularity that appears unusually ordered. The angles between intersecting lines approach right angles, and the compartments maintain a surprisingly consistent scale. This raises an uncomfortable question for purely natural explanations. Why does this formation exhibit a pattern that mimics human-made geometry so closely? For those inclined to explore alternative interpretations, the Waffle Rock inevitably invites comparison with ancient stonework from distant parts of the world. In sites such as Machu Picchu or Pumapunku, stone blocks are shaped and fitted with remarkable precision, displaying an understanding of geometry that continues to intrigue researchers. While the Waffle Rock is not constructed from separate blocks, its surface pattern evokes a similar sense of deliberate organization. The repetition of squares recalls modular design, a principle found in architecture and engineering across many ancient cultures. Even if no direct connection exists, the visual resemblance alone is enough to blur the boundary between natural formation and cultural artifact. It challenges the observer to reconsider how easily the human mind distinguishes between what is made and what is formed. To date, no formal archaeological excavation has identified evidence that the waffle rock is a man-made structure. Geological analyses continue to support natural mechanisms as the most plausible origin, emphasizing the role of jointing patterns in sedimentary rock and the gradual action of erosion. Some researchers suggest that the apparent regularity may be an example of pattern amplification, where initial fractures, perhaps only loosely ordered, are exaggerated over time by environmental processes that preferentially deepen and widen certain khutot. Others propose that subtle variations in mineral composition could guide the formation of a grid-like structure, and yet none of these hypotheses fully eliminate the sense of anomaly. The waffle rock remains a case where explanation exists, but intuition resists it. In the end, the mystery of the waffle rock may not lie in proving whether it is natural or artificial, but in understanding why it feels so convincingly like both. It occupies a rare space where geology imitates design, where randomness appears ordered, and where the boundary between nature and intention becomes difficult to define. In the arid landscapes of Southern California, where granite outcrops rise quietly from the earth, one particular stone disrupts the expectations of archaeology. At first glance, it appears unremarkable, just another weathered boulder shaped by time. But carved into its surface is a pattern that seems almost deliberate. In its complexity, a winding, continuous network of grooves forming what resembles a labyrinth. Unlike decorative petroglyphs or symbolic markings commonly found across ancient sites, this design carries a sense of structure, intention, and perhaps even purpose. The Hemet Maze stone is not monumental in size, yet it presents a question that echoes across centuries. Why would ancient people carve a maze into solid stone? And what knowledge or belief guided their hands? The Hemet Maze stone lies in Riverside County, California, a region defined by dry valleys, scattered vegetation, and ancient geological formations. Unlike major archaeological complexes that exist within broader cultural landscapes, this stone appears largely isolated. There are no grand temples nearby, no visible settlement remains that would clearly anchor it to a specific civilization. This isolation is one of its greatest mysteries. Ancient artifacts are typically found within network cities, burial grounds, ritual sites, but here, the maze stands alone. It raises a troubling possibility for archaeologists. Either the surrounding context has been lost to time, or the stone served a purpose so specific that it required no architectural support. Its placement on exposed granite suggests it was meant to be seen, yet its meaning remains hidden. The stone came to wider attention in the early 20th century when observers began documenting its unusual carvings. Unlike many discoveries that occurred during formal excavations, the Hemet Maze stone was recognized gradually, almost accidentally. Its visibility above ground meant it had likely been seen for generations, yet its significance went unrecognized for much of that time. Early documentation revealed a striking feature. The grooves form a continuous path that loops and turns without intersecting randomly. This is not chaotic carving, it is design. The pattern appears to guide the eye and perhaps the finger toward a central point. Such intentionality suggests that whoever created it was not merely decorating stone, but encoding an idea. What makes the Hemet Maze stone particularly compelling is the nature of its design. The carved lines form a maze-like structure, but unlike complex modern mazes with multiple branches and dead ends, this appears closer to a unicursal labyrinth, a single, continuous path leading inward. This distinction is critical. Unicursal labyrinths have appeared in various ancient cultures, often associated with ritual movement or symbolic journeys. The act of tracing such a path is not about solving a puzzle, but about experiencing a progression, an inward movement that may represent transformation, meditation, or spiritual passage. The grooves on the Hemet Maze stone are remarkably consistent in depth and width, suggesting careful execution. Carving such smooth, flowing lines into hard granite would have required time, precision, and tools capable of repeated impact without fracturing the intended design. This alone challenges assumptions about the technological limitations of prehistoric artisans in the region. Despite its intriguing features, the Hemet Maze stone exists in a curious state of archaeological silence. There are no definitive artifacts directly associated with it, no tools left behind, no inscriptions explaining its purpose, no clear stratigraphic context to establish its age. Scholars have proposed connections to Native American groups such as the Luiseno or Cahuilla, both of whom inhabited the broader region. Yet no surviving oral traditions definitively describe a stone maze of this kind. This absence is not unusual in archaeology, but here it is particularly striking. The stone seems to speak in a visual language, yet no translation has survived. This lack of context forces researchers to rely on comparison rather than direct evidence. And it is in these comparisons that the mystery deepens. Labyrinth motifs are not unique to California. Similar patterns have appeared in ancient Greece, on Mediterranean pottery, in Scandinavian rock carvings, and even in certain indigenous traditions of the Americas. While the designs vary, the underlying concept, a winding path leading to a center, remains consistent. Could the Hemet Maze stone represent an independent invention of a universal human idea? Or does it hint at deeper connections between distant cultures? The possibility of independent development is supported by the simplicity of the concept. Humans across time have created symbolic representations of journeys, cycles, and transformation. A labyrinth is a natural extension of these ideas. Yet the precision and intentionality of the Hemet carving suggest more than casual symbolism. It feels deliberate, almost instructional. Without definitive evidence, interpretations of the Hemet Maze stone remain speculative. One theory suggests it may function as a map perhaps of water sources, migration paths, or seasonal routes in an otherwise harsh environment. The winding lines could encode knowledge critical for survival, translated into a symbolic form. Another interpretation views the stone as a ritual object. The act of tracing the labyrinth with a finger could mirror a spiritual journey, guiding participants through a symbolic passage from the outer world to an inner center. In this view, the stone becomes not just an object, but an experience. A third possibility is that it served as a teaching tool or mnemonic device, a way to pass down knowledge through generations. The pattern could encode stories, cosmological beliefs, or social structures understood only by those initiated into its meaning. Each theory explains part of the mystery, but none fully resolves it. The physical creation of the Hemet Maze stone raises its own set of questions. Granite is a hard material resistant to casual carving. Producing smooth, continuous grooves would require repeated controlled strikes, likely with stone tools harder than the surface being worked or through techniques involving abrasion. The consistency of the lines suggests planning. This was not improvised. The artisan likely envisioned the entire pattern before carving began, maintaining spatial awareness across the stone's surface. Any significant mistake would have been difficult, if not impossible, to correct. This level of precision implies a sophisticated understanding of both material and design. It challenges the notion that such works were purely spontaneous or decorative. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the Hemet Maze stone is its uniqueness. While petroglyphs are common across the American Southwest, few, if any, replicate this exact labyrinthine design. Why would such a distinctive pattern appear only once? If it held cultural significance, one might expect repetition. If it was part of a broader tradition, where are the other examples? Its singularity suggests that it may have been created for a specific purpose at a specific time by individuals whose knowledge did not spread or did not survive. In the arid silence of the American Southwest, where wind moves slowly across volcanic ridges and dry grasses cling to life, there lies a stone that seems profoundly out of place. Known as the Los Lunas Decalogue stone, this massive boulder bears a long, carefully incised inscription, one that appears to echo a text central to ancient Near Eastern religion, the Ten Commandments. The idea alone is unsettling. A biblical code carved into stone, not in the deserts of Sinai or the hills of Judea, but on a remote slope overlooking the modern town of Los Lunas. It is a discovery that, if authentic, would disrupt one of the most established narratives in human history: who reached the Americas and when. Unlike many ancient inscriptions tied to known cultures, this stone exists in isolation. There is no surrounding settlement, no temple complex, no burial ground, only a single carved surface exposed to centuries of sun, wind, and doubt. It is this isolation that gives the stone its unsettling power. It does not belong to a known story. It demands one. The stone rests on the lower slopes of Hidden Mountain, a modest rise in central New Mexico, surrounded by a landscape shaped by erosion and time. The terrain is harsh, but not impassable. Rocky paths wind upward, offering a view of the Rio Grande Valley below. It is not an obvious place for ancient ritual, nor a natural crossroads of civilizations. And yet here, the stone remains partially embedded, as though it had always been part of the land. Its placement raises immediate questions. Why here? If ancient travelers had reached this region, what drew them to this specific hill? There are no clear markers of long-term habitation, no ruins that suggest a lost colony or forgotten expedition. The stone stands alone, as if it were a message left deliberately meant to endure, without context. The surrounding silence only deepens the mystery, turning geography into part of the puzzle itself. Unlike many archaeological finds, the Los Lunas Decalogue stone does not have a clear moment of discovery. It enters the historical record, gradually mentioned in local accounts in the late 19th century. By the early 20th century, it had drawn the attention of scholars, explorers, and curious observers. But there is no definitive record of who first carved it, nor who first recognized its significance. This absence of origin is more than a missing detail. It is a critical fracture in the story. Without a documented discovery, the stone exists in a gray zone between artifact and anomaly. Some accounts suggest it was known to local residents long before scholars arrived. Others imply it may have been overlooked until interest in biblical archaeology grew. Each version adds a layer of uncertainty, making the stone as much a historical mystery as the inscription itself. At the heart of the mystery lies the inscription. Carved deeply into the stone's surface, the text appears to be written in Paleo-Hebrew, an ancient script used in the first millennium BCE. The lines resemble passages from the Ten Commandments, with phrasing that echoes early biblical traditions rather than later standardized versions. To stand before the stone is to confront a contradiction. The characters are at once familiar and foreign, recognizable to those who study ancient Semitic languages, yet oddly inconsistent. Some letters align closely with known Paleo-Hebrew forms, while others appear slightly altered, as though filtered through imperfect knowledge. The text itself is not a perfect reproduction. It contains variations, omissions, and structural irregularities that resist easy classification. These inconsistencies have become a focal point of debate. Supporters of authenticity argue that such irregularities are expected in ancient inscriptions, especially those created far from cultural centers. Critics counter that the errors resemble those made by modern learners rather than ancient scribes. The inscription, in this sense, is both evidence and enigma, a text that reveals and conceals at the same time. One of the most difficult questions surrounding the stone is its age. The carved grooves show signs of weathering, their edges softened by centuries of exposure. In some areas, a thin patina has formed, suggesting a long interaction between the stone and its environment. To some observers, this is evidence of great antiquity, a natural process that cannot easily be replicated. Yet others remain unconvinced. Techniques for artificial aging, including chemical treatments and mechanical abrasion, have existed for over a century. Could the weathering be the result of deliberate manipulation? The stone offers no definitive answer. There is no reliable method to date the carving itself with precision. Without organic material or associated artifacts, the inscription exists outside the reach of conventional archaeological tools. This uncertainty transforms every visible detail into a subject of interpretation. Each groove, each softened edge, becomes a question rather than a conclusion. Time has touched the stone, but it has not clarified it. The Los Lunas Decalogue stone does not stand entirely alone in the broader landscape of historical anomalies. Across the world, there are inscriptions and artifacts that appear far from their expected cultural contexts. Runic carvings in North America, debated transoceanic contacts, and isolated symbols that defy conventional timelines. Most of these have ultimately been explained as later creations, misunderstandings, or deliberate hoaxes. And yet the idea of early transoceanic contact is not without precedent. Ancient Mediterranean civilizations possessed seafaring capabilities that allowed them to traverse vast distances. The Phoenicians in particular were skilled navigators, and their reach extended far beyond their homeland. Could a small group have traveled further than recorded history suggests? Could a fragment of their culture have reached the New World, leaving behind a single, enigmatic trace? The stone invites such comparisons, but it does not resolve them. Instead, it exists at the intersection of possibility and skepticism, where evidence is suggestive but never conclusive. Three primary interpretations dominate the discussions surrounding the Los Lunas Decalogue stone. The first is the most dramatic, that the inscription is genuine, a relic of ancient travelers who crossed the ocean long before the age of Columbus. If true, it would require a profound re-evaluation of global history, suggesting that cultural and religious ideas moved across continents far earlier than currently accepted. The second theory is more grounded in historical precedent. It proposes that the stone is a modern creation, carved in the 19th or early 20th century by someone with knowledge of Hebrew texts. This explanation accounts for the linguistic inconsistencies and the lack of archaeological context. It also aligns with a period when interest in biblical antiquity was growing and when similar artifacts occasionally appeared. The third theory occupies a middle ground. It suggests that the inscription may have been created by early settlers or migrants with religious motivations, not as a hoax, but as an expression of faith. In this view, the stone is not ancient in origin, but it is not intended to deceive. It is a cultural artifact of a different kind, one rooted in belief rather than history. Each theory carries its own implications, and none can be fully proven or dismissed. The stone resists certainty, remaining suspended between narratives. The Los Lunas Decalogue stone endures not because it provides answers, but because it refuses to. It is a single object fixed in place, yet capable of unsettling entire frameworks of history. Whether it is a relic of forgotten exploration, a product of human imagination, or something in between, it continues to challenge the boundaries between past and present.